Thank you very much. I'm not from an EMB, but I'm a
Yes,
friend of the
friend of an
EMBs because
EMB.
SADC Parliamentary Forum and
Yes.
ECF SADC are partners. Maybe more fundamentally, the issues we're talking about borders on the mandate of parliaments. If we're talking about the legal framework facilitating for gender equality, for women political participation, that mandate falls on parliament. And we have made a general observation that we don't think that even in the efforts that we do in post-election engagement, we have done enough to appreciate what parliaments could do in terms of leading the reform process around the electoral legal framework. One of the things that happens within parliament is that once we discuss the issue of election, uh, parliamentarians being product of election, but more importantly, doing so under the umbrella of their political parties, they tend to wear the political hats and less the national duty to address the concerns that are emerging in terms of what is happening. Right now, I think there's general consensus, and one of the colleagues raised this earlier to say one of the missing links in our efforts to really deal with the legislative gaps is the political parties as players in democracy and in delivering gender equality. We have often characterized them as an albatross rather than a facilitator or a midwifery of gender equality. And this partly is conceptual in the sense that political parties continue to view themselves as private clubs. Yet, given a very special mandate of delivering on democracy. If you listen to the colleague who was presenting the findings of gender equality from the South African elections, the second biggest partner in the GNU, DA, is proudly and openly stated that they would not want to embrace quotas, as if that was optional. The question of addressing, holding political parties accountable. When you look at at least in the SADC region, you even have countries where political parties are not legislated in terms of how they operate, and therefore there is no mechanism legally of demanding for them to comply with gender equality. And yet, we often say political parties don't become democratic because they are governing. If a political party is not democratic before it gets into power, it will remain undemocratic even when it has power, it has state power. So if your second biggest party through the GNU openly tells everyone that we do not embrace gender equality, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's the conversation we need to do. And for me, parliaments have not been held accountable enough in terms of what they could do within the ambit of the constitutional mandate they have. Why do I say that? Often when post-election, because in almost all legal frameworks, electoral commissions are established through an act of parliament, or the constitution and an act of parliament then expands on their mandate. They are also funded through a national appropriation, where parliament has a bigger role. And after every election, electoral management bodies are also required by law to report to parliament. If you go to the agenda or order papers of parliament, one of the constants you will find is actually receiving reports from constitutional bodies, and the electoral management body is one of those. To what extent do we see that as an opportunity for us to work with electoral management bodies to make recommendations on some of these issues that we expect that they must deal with? Because one of the challenges we are seeing more and more is players disagree, particularly political parties and other players that have the responsibility from the state regarding governance, regarding elections. There's a tendency of wanting to appropriate all the things that all the other bodies cannot do effectively on the election management board, even if they are not related to elections. So if it is about media, everyone wants the Electoral Commission to manage the media. If it is about political funding, everyone wants the Electoral Commission to manage political funding. We now have a challenge in Namibia last week or so. The Electoral Commission deregistered some political parties that didn't comply with election funding. And one asks, why are we burdening the Electoral Commission with issues that are non-electoral and very controversial ahead of a major election? It comes from our failure, our lack of trust with certain institutions. And then the Electoral Commission, probably they are the East punching bag and therefore want to burden them with everything else. That's why even when we are presenting, we say they need to do enough to make sure that there are women coming on board. On what basis? When there is a low voter turnout, everyone will say the Electoral Commission did not do enough. I listened to the conversations in this Africa, I mean in South Africa, in the 2019 elections, when there was low voter turnout. I sometimes don't call it apathy because it is not quite apathy. The youth in South Africa had mobilized around Fees Must Fall. And university vice chancellors admitted that they were forced by the young people to change policy in 10 days, which they had not changed in 10 years. And the same youth didn't go out to vote. The issue was beyond the Electoral Commission in terms of getting those youth to vote, because what they are protesting about are issues that are well beyond the Electoral Commission. So my point is we really need to broaden the issues when we talk about accountability. To what extent have we held Parliament accountable for failing to align our legislative frameworks with existing regional and continental and international frameworks? We are very lukewarm, and the electoral commissions are the easy target, in my view. And I think it's a conversation we need to have, because we want to facilitate you to tell the parliamentarians to say, do enough, you have not done enough. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Can we clap hands for that? I think that those were very insightful remarks. Are there any more reactions? We forgot to clap hands for Sisrumbi, who came in with this. Please, can we clap hands for my sister when she came in with fresh insights? She is striking. She is striking. Okay, we have corrected our mistake. We have corrected our mistake.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any further comments, EMBs in the room?
Yes, I think my colleague will extend further what the previous speaker has said.
Yes.
So I will venture onto one item that I heard being spoken out frequently in the morning, this afternoon, and perhaps tomorrow. Violence. I think the idea did very well. Their research in finding out that violence also shortens the need and the appetite for women to participate in elections. But I think they can also go further in amplifying the violence and stratifying it. Here we were talking with my colleague, and we have three forms of violence that affect the participation of women in elections. We've got gender-based violence. Its generic sense, its generic meaning in Africa is domestic violence. There's a way how domestic violence affects the political participation of women. Then the second strata is on violence against women in politics. It's a different form of violence. Then the third one, which is almost silent but producing a devastating effect on our statistics, violence in politics. Women are peacemakers. And when there is violence in politics and not perpetrated on them, women will not participate in elections where they see violence happening. So all those forms of violence and their strata must also be looked at and the strategies made in order to find solutions. I will give my colleague.
Right, thank you so much. I'm not flogging a dead horse, but I would like to re-emphasize that elections are legal, not logical. Meaning to say, just add on to what she said, as long as something has not been tabled in Parliament, the EMB is powerless. Then on the previous presenter, there was a mention that parties are not doing enough to submit lists on the quota system. And we know that a quota system is, we are vying towards a gender balance 50-50. And we know that a quota is not half. So we still want to lobby our system, educate them, we capacitate them, make sure that even when they submit, they don't submit a quota system, a half system, because otherwise we'll have to do things twice. So yes, but still on the same issue of submitting the quota system, most political parties are not aware of the requirements of some of the EMBs on what to submit on the quota system, and they make it a last minute activity. So much so that when they come to the nomination court, their lists will be rejected, and thereby they end up not having the representation of the women's quota. So I was thinking that maybe as EMB funds permitting, there be a fund that is focused on the political parties to be educated so that and to be capacitated so that they get to know what to exactly submit. Because when we do voter education, when we educate them amongst other stakeholders, but when we want to zero into those political parties, I think it probably needs a different funding so that we can take them by their side and try to capacitate them on their own so that we really have the quota system. But I was thinking not of a quota anymore, but balanced 50-50. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. I just want to make one or two comments. It was indicated that the number of female commissioners has dropped in other countries, and that is something that is seen to be reasons why EMB are not doing what is expected. I wanted to comment and say that the responsibility, like for example in our country, of appointing commissioner rests with the recruiting panel and also the president who appoints. So much as EMB would want and would lobby to ensure that women also get a position as per the law, like for example, ours is 2/3, not more than 2/3 gender rule. So if they are male are 2/3, then at least 1/3 should be women. And also the opposite is true. So this is something that goes beyond the work of EMBs. There is also something on 2/3 gender rule, whereby in the constitution, the law is very clear. The constitution is very clear in terms of meeting that threshold. But when it comes to legislating, to make sure that there is a statute to implement that, there is a challenge because the parliamentarians who are the legislators are unwilling to come up with such statutes. And therefore, as EMB, we are forced to come up with an operational kind of a function to implement that. Like, for example, in the last general election, we tried to implement that. We had 79 political parties submitting their list for top-up, and all of them did not comply with the not more than 2/3 general. We rejected all of them. They resubmitted again, and now we had like 99% complying. Only 2 parties did not comply, the big ones. They took us to court, and that activity was stayed. We went to election with the major political parties not complying with the truth agenda rule. So it is something that sometimes is also beyond the election management bodies. I think there's a need to probably lobby and go beyond what EMB can do to ensure that we reach the threshold of having gender parity in politics. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. More comments from the floor? EMBs, more comments. I see Memory has a comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think my comment to electoral bodies is I think their mandate also extends beyond just the elections, which are political. So we see some bodies also being part and parcel of some of the elections that happen. I mean, recently in Kenya, we really had a very controversial elections, and allow me, our CEO from IEBC, as women's rights organizations, there was a case of the TE states. So they did their elections, and in those elections, the candidate who was elected is someone who has actually been profiled by BBC as a serial abuser, sexual abuser. And we were saying he did not even qualify to stand for elections. So I think we need to see how do we get electoral bodies, even for the political elections, even some of the political parties, even if they are independent, to put their candidates. If those candidates are profiled as being abusers or perpetrating violence, even in the other elections, and it's recorded, and they should not even be standing for elections. So I think this is something we need to keep challenging electoral bodies to say, your independence should actually be underlined and also be using some of the principles that we are talking about, because the reason why violence perpetuates and continues is because our bodies are not, the electoral bodies, they don't come out and condemn or even disqualify. So if we are to eliminate political parties or any candidates who have a track record as a minimum in any election, I think that would be a start to addressing the issues. Otherwise, we see a whole cyclic way of violence being perpetrated all the time, and nothing gets done. We see candidates also, some of them violate. We've seen it in all elections over and over. So I don't know what electoral bodies can really put in place, because we don't see them having that teeth and really standing up, especially when it comes to violence against women, about violence in politics. So for me, it's a minimum requirement. With all the good work that electoral bodies does, I still feel there's more that they should do in terms of zero tolerance to violence. We don't see it. And this case, for our current elections, honestly, of that seaboard, someone who has actually come out, we need more from electoral bodies.
Okay. Memory, he would like to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much for pointing out that
Okay.
that issue of T-Board of Kenya. This is an institution whereby the court ordered them to look for an independent institution to conduct election on their behalf, and they actually picked us based on our work. So we agreed to actually do the work. But one of the things that the court ruled, it said that you must use the article of association of the T-Board. You must also use the criteria they provide you. So one of the criteria, which is actually it's under contest, is the fact that you must be somebody of good conduct. And then we asked them, so what criteria are we going to use to do that, to confirm whether somebody is actually of good conduct or not? They said it's actually evidence that from the police that they are somebody of good conduct. So we can't challenge what the police will say. And also we cannot be able to use hearsay in the media to disqualify somebody. So no. Let me finish. Since you talked. No. Chapter 6
Okay,
actually.
we seem to have a debate going on there.
Even us, chapter 6.
Yes.
Even in Kenya, for example, when somebody is actually taken to court and that matter has not been ruled, you cannot disqualify that person. It's very clear. So you must use criteria.
Not guilty until proven.
Because
otherwise.
you must be proven first. Yeah. So we use criteria that has been provided to us. And we say, but the way, T-Board of Kenya still has an opportunity not to include that person in there. But in terms of election, this person was nominated and actually people voted for him. So what do you have to do with that? And the criteria are very, very clear. So I think that example is not a good example to use it here.
I think it takes us back to what Sisrumbi pointed out, where she said there are maybe limits in some cases as to what EMBs can do, because it goes back to legislation. What are the provisions of the country laws, the legislation? What policies do we have in place? Yes. I think Matsuri later wants to come in.
Yeah, but you tested it. As we are sitting here in Botswana, the ruling party is going for primary elections. And here is a man who, after the girlfriend left him, demolished the house that he wanted to build for her. That was harsh. Not only that, he denied. And after that, he kept on threatening her with messages. She went to the police. Yesterday, he was released. What is the political party doing? Nothing. They said, proven guilty. You know, that word, it makes it difficult for the electoral bodies, because it started with political parties, primary election. Imagine, they are far from that one, but he's being allowed to contest. So when he is voted maybe by the people that then he want to contest, because there is no charge, they can't say no. I am not in the body, in the electoral body, but I know that at least the law should allow them, even if the party has allowed, to say no. We know that this gentleman has a case; he shouldn't contest. So I agree with you, daughter, that we are having a lot of criminals in our parliaments, in our councils. This man demolished, is all over. And now he is threatening the lady. So, but maybe he's going to win the primaries that taking place 20th of this month. Then we'll Electoral Act and Commission. I'm not going to say it because it's starting from far away from them. So thank you very much. I just wanted to share that.
Okay. Thank you, Matsuri. So I don't know whether this is a story for one day. I'm going to stand guided by Josephine and colleagues. At which point do we bring in Dr. Roba? We don't want to change the conversations that seem to be getting more exciting, but I think we are also trying to manage time.
Sure. I think at this point, we don't see that there's any other actions, so we can wrap up and then
Okay. Okay. Dr. Roba, if you can come in with your concluding remarks, make sure everyone has agreed to something. We need conclusive remarks from you.
This one, oh. I'm already, I think. Hello.
No, thank you very much. I mean, it's just to maybe highlight one or two things from the very interesting conversations. Let me first really thank the moderator I think, for steering us after lunch. It's not very easy, right? So thank you very much, madam. And also very honored to sit next to this powerful lady. Yeah, Karine, a very good friend of ours. And I think, as we were saying in the morning, the data from the barometer really highlights quite a number of key areas and markers of stress and key areas where there's critical improvement that needs to take place. So I think, as International Idea, really looking at now, basically this session, we're looking at the conversation with on what the data really says on elections and also the role of the electoral management bodies. I think some good things that came out. Maybe I'm not going to pick on everything else, but just to note from the findings that really the critical role that women bring to political governance in Africa. I think that's very, very important, and decision making, and at all levels. I think the levels are also quite important from what we have seen, whether it's in the cabinet, whether it's actually presidential candidates, whether it's the political party leadership position. I think the report actually provides quite an opportunity for us to look at what are some of the areas of advocacy where we need to really start focusing on. I think it came out in the morning that maybe the political party leadership, is also areas of importance. Mentorship of emerging political leaders, I think, is important. Listening to Honorable Fatuma and our guest speaker, Honorable here, I think it really shows that the hard work that women actually put in, which becomes a role model across the continent. I think that is something we need to appreciate. But at least having 49 countries or out of the 54 in Africa having independent electoral management bodies, the level of independence might differ, right? But at least having 49 electoral management bodies, 49 countries out of the 54 having independent electoral management bodies is already a step in the right direction. So then it also takes the leadership of those commissions themselves to then ensure that, the laws, the legal reforms that makes their work easier are passed, but at the same time, they should also implement their acts with a considerable level of courage. I think that's important. And then the role that the EMBs have in gender mainstreaming, I think, is coming out. So there's a lot. I'm sure tomorrow there's a huge session where I think a lot of the EMBs will be sharing their experiences. So we'll be able to explore most of those. What are some of the practical things that mainstreaming can be done around? And I think also the data did show, the findings showed that 28% of the commissioners in the different EMBs which are studied are women. So I think it's still below the 30% mark, sort of. But I think the 28% there is also something to appreciate. But then there's need for a lot of reforms, I think, in various electoral laws. But in some areas, I think it's more about implementation. I took a very good point which Honorable Fatuma made, that the East Africa Legislative Assembly, this is something I didn't know. I didn't know before as well. The East Africa Legislative Assembly have legislative powers or lawmaking power that actually supersedes those of the national parliaments. Then that actually shows an area then, if you are then looking at some of these regional blocks, and I'm looking at my brother here from the SADC parliament, which is coming very soon, they should actually also enact something like that then. That, the SADC parliament will have powers, legislative powers, that actually supersedes the national laws. And I think there were just comments now from Madam that some of our parliaments are full of crooks, So if the national parliaments are in trouble, then maybe we better, have something at the regional level. Not to speak about Pan-African Parliament, which is also an interesting body we need to discuss at some point, right? Now, I think the aspect around financing, a very interesting thing came out. If 70% of the countries have a provision to provide political party funding, but they are not targeted. That's what Rumbiza is saying. We need to then look at how do we then reform some of these laws, push for some of these laws that they become, targeted funding for the female leaders who are emerging. So I think maybe that's an area. So it's aspect around. We don't want to put a lot of burden on the EMBs, but I think also the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties, in some areas. In some countries, there's the power sharing, not a power share, segregation of powers. Let me put it that way, where the registrar of political parties have certain mandates. Then the EMBs actually do elections. Then the regulation of political parties, political party funding, disciplinary issues within political parties, then becomes the mandate of the registrar of political parties. But I don't think all countries in Africa actually have those offices, as they're not separate. They are sometimes a department within an electoral commission. I think that's the way it was also in Kenya, CEO, before then the split was made. I think the aspect around the violence against women is important to look at. I think voter education, leadership and mentorship, I think for emerging female politicians is quite important. Electoral integrity, I think, is a big issue. IDEA this year will produce a report on global state of democracy, which will come out sometimes in September, looking at electoral legitimacy in times of radical uncertainties. So I think that report will also look at how do we protect electoral integrity. If we want to really look at a continent that's going to democratically move forward, how do we do that? Because the last data, it's only 8 countries. Sorry, it's only 9 countries in Africa which are among the top 50 countries which appears to be performing well when it comes to democracy. So 9 out of 50 top performing coming from Africa, which I think is important, particularly in the area of political participation. So I think there's a lot that we expect from the EMBs, but at the same time, I think the EMBs also don't operate in isolation. They occur in an electoral ecosystem that I think we need to appreciate, and then make sure that then their work becomes a little bit made easier. But I think a lot of things are spoken about. I think if you look at the data from this morning, the countries which are doing well either have proportional representation modality, others have the first past the post issue. Maybe as we look at also areas for advocacy, we need to look at what are the mechanisms, what are some of the legal regimes that makes it easier for women to put through and have a considerable number in parliament. I think that's something that we need to start looking at, but it's still dealing with structural issues and tightening the role of parliament. Sexual and gender-based violence, I think this is a big thing. We have seen the mechanism, whether it's psychological, whether it's intimidation and social media assault. Those are things maybe then where the law enforcement agency actually need to start tightening at those aspects. So maybe as advocacy points, as I said earlier, we need to look at the role of regional parliaments. We need to look at the role of the EMBs, maybe fine-tune it a little bit more in terms of the recommendations which are coming out and register of political parties. And I think the other area to really see is capacity building in terms of training and capacity. What yesterday my sister Karine did speak about, how do we ensure emancipation of African women, training, capacity building, funding, and also deal with the structural issues that undermine the same. And then the political party leadership. Maybe if we have more and more women in positions of leadership in political parties, then some of these obstacles are also internally removed. Some of the bureaucratic institutions, if you particularly look at, post-independence or liberation political parties in some of our African countries which are dominant, whether it's ANC, whether it's CCM, whether it's the KANU of Kenya many years ago, those change can only happen internally. You can only bring changes within a political party. So having maybe more women-led political parties. So it could be even the area of development programming. How do we enhance, more and more women to actually start crafting and coming up with more political parties and occupying such positions, in as much as also ensuring that parties tend to be to have some ideology. I think African political parties is something we can discuss another day. Are the political parties even different from each other, right? And do they have ideologies that they drive, right? So I think it's very important. So it's a conversation beyond this, but even within what we have, let's make the heart better, the house better, but ensuring that the political parties are more democratic and also provide tailored support to women in political participation. So those are just some quick thoughts, but there are areas of synergy where EMBs can do. There's a lot of work that I'm sure tomorrow we'll cover with the role of civil society in promoting and pushing some of these advocacy points that we are talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to my brother.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I don't think whether there is further versions that I need to give at this point. I want to appreciate everyone for creating time, irrespective of the energy which might be going down. Do you have to make a reflection? Wow. So there is we were trying to close out on the reflections. Yeah. So Teresa, take it quick.
Okay, there is something that Dr. Roba has said about systems and institutions, how they work, and how you can still support even when maybe you have difficult laws or when the laws are not making sense. And it quickly reminded me that some of these issues, if we are talking about gender equality and we are talking about protecting women and we are talking about making progress, I was just writing it down and I said sometimes you might just need, even when the laws are different, you might just need to make what makes sense. Because as individual leaders, you need to just decide what makes sense and you'd be judged for many years to come, for example. And that's what the advocacy that we are calling for everyone in this room who works in an institution, that you can make a change. That is what it's called for. Because at the end of the day, these laws, these policies, these procedures are made for people, to govern people and to make sense for people. So when it doesn't make sense, then it only leaves us room to ask ourselves, what do we want to be judged for? And my memory here was reminding me of, this is what Gen Z is now doing to us, because we've not been making sense with our structures, with our policies, with our laws, and they think, let's make what makes sense for the society. It does not make sense to have a leader who's an abuser. It just doesn't make sense, regardless of what the procedure or the structure says. So I just thought that, just picking up from the idea of advocacy and making changes in our systems, let's as leaders just try and make sense of what can work for our society and for the women if we are looking for that change.
Thank you so much, Teresa. What a wonderful way to conclude on this. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your commitment, all the reflections from the room, to the presenter, as well as presenters, the AU, the entire team, the moderator. We highly appreciate. We want to end the day at this point so that we gather a bit of energy for tomorrow. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. It seems it would be fire. Yeah, tomorrow would be fire. So thank you so much. And we call it off at this point. Till tomorrow, have a blessed evening.